So, this paper has been prepared very much in the idea of the workshop, so I hope you realise this is not a completed, rounded, finished and written up piece of work. This is very much some thoughts and ideas, and I've put a number of things in the talk that are not in the paper because I thought, again, I'm throwing results out, and a lot of this work is being done in collaboration with Pablo and a number of other collaborators. Okay. So, does this one will run that, will it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, should, okay. So the aim of this particular project was to try and look at overloads and understand what goes on at the crack during overloads, to understand why cracks then accelerate and then later retard, and ideally to look at plane stress and plane strain. The paper, again, the written paper is predominantly under plane, it describes work under plane stress, but I've included some of the work here under plane strain as well. As I say, we're going to look at 100% overload, so we're going to look at constant fatigue, 100% overload, and then fatigue thereon. And the idea was to try and use synchrotron diffraction to measure the stresses at the crack tip, to understand what's going on locally, and to identify what's going on in terms of plasticity-induced closure, and also to relate what goes on at the surface as measured by digital image correlation, and I know there'll be a number of talks looking at digital image correlation later, and also to compare that with what goes on in the interior by using synchrotron diffraction. And it's the synchrotron diffraction I'm going to focus on most today, because I think that adds probably more to the workshop than the digital image correlation, which I know a number of others are probably better than we are. Okay, synchrotron X-ray diffraction. I've included this image because I think it gives an idea of my thinking about what you can do with synchrotron X-rays. You can use diffraction, and you can measure a lot of things with diffraction. You can measure any bridging stresses, perhaps in fibres or composites. You can measure the elastic crack tip stress field. You can measure the plastic, I think Neil's been using the word enclave, the plastic area local to the crack by using broadening. And then you can use imaging as well, under certain circumstances, to look at closure that's occurring in front of the crack, to look at any debris that's left behind, to look at any voids or failures, to look at micro-cracking, to look at crack tip deflection, and even if you've got self-healing, to look at the healing mechanisms that are taking place at the crack tip. And I see synchrotron X-rays as providing a really good opportunity to provide complementary information about fracture mechanics to that you might get from traditional methods. So I'm not going to talk about the whole spread of things today, and I'm certainly not going to talk about tomography, but I do think it provides an interesting way forward for studying what goes on local to a crack tip. Okay, so we did some very simple experiments. We measured the crack length, and as the crack, we then subjected to an overload, and we get some form of change in the crack growth as per the number of cycles. If we look at the crack growth rate, we see after overload, we see a sudden increase in the rate, and then a decrease in the rate, and then some recovery. We looked at two kinds of samples: a 3 mm thick, what I'm going to call plane stress CT sample, and a 15 mm thick, what I'm going to call plane strain CT sample. And in both cases, we get similar kinds of behaviours. That is the plane stress, and in plane strain, again, you can see at the point B where we overload, we get an increase in the rate, going down to a decrease in the rate, and then back to something roughly equivalent to where we started. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking just before, just after, and somewhere after the overload event. So I'm not going to go into detail about digital image correlation, but we simply measured with a CCD camera, one CCD camera, the crack surface. We used a travelling microscope on the other side in order to measure the crack growth rate using the travelling microscope, and we recorded the displacements. And you get something that looks a little bit like this. I know it's not very easy to see, but hopefully you can see the red arrows here that are showing the opening at this point, and we measured it all the way through, from the initial constant fatigue through the overload event, through retardation, through acceleration, into retardation. So we measured at all those places. And again, I show some results that, I think these results are in the paper. Yeah, these are in the paper. Plane stress, here we see a characteristic sort of closure event. As you unload the sample, the crack opening closes, and you at some point see a zero opening, and we end up with a little knee here at about something like 0.3 of the K max. So that's in traditional fatigue. Then after overload, we see a lack of a knee, and then as you go beyond overload, you start to see that knee again, and then some way past overload, a very characteristic kind of event. So, just to summarise, we get a knee prior to overload, we get a lack of a knee around overload, and then we get an increasing level of a knee on the way past. And in plane strain, we get more or less the same thing. Again, prior to overload, during overload, and then some way after overload. And again, if you measure the opening, you can see this is some way after overload. Here's the overload event, and you can see that the crack has grown past the overload to this point here. And again, the opening, you can see the opening. It tends to close more in the region behind the overload, and it tends to stay open upstream of the overload. Okay. So that's just a bit of scene setting, really. X-ray diffraction, we use an incoming beam, a very small beam usually. We measure two detectors, one in the vertical direction, one in the horizontal direction. The one in the vertical direction is measuring the crack opening strain. The one in the horizontal direction is measuring the strain in this direction. So we can measure strain in two directions. And again, if somebody catches me in the bar, I'm quite happy to show you the results in the crack growth direction, but today I'm going to focus in the stresses in the crack opening direction. In principle, you can use a gauge of maybe 25 microns. So these results here are shown with a 25 micron gauge volume. So we took many, many points. This is 1 millimeter. This is 1.5 millimeters. And you can use very, very small gauges. But in this case, we found we had large grains. And of course, you're using the grains in the material as a strain gauge. So if you've got very large grains, you have to use a large gauge volume if you want to get a kind of continuum in result. So you'll find today we're using quite a large gauge, about 0.5 millimeter, simply because when we looked at the samples, and you'll see in the results, considerable point-to-point scatter. This just shows the kind of field you measure. So this is the crack tip, the opening, this is measuring the stress in this direction, and you can see the strain. So this is 1800 microstrain. 1800 microstrain. So that's 0.18% and some small level of compression. So this is under load, so we can measure the stresses as we go through a cycle. So the idea was we would measure the strain and we would measure it through a cycle as we unloaded, and we'd also measure at different positions as the crack grew through the overload event. So that was the idea. You can see here we've got considerable point-to-point scatter, and that is a bit frustrating, but that was an experimental effect due to the grain size. This is the overload event, and this is on unloading, and so you can see the crack tip stress field here. It's not very well defined, and one of our problems was that the grain size was really a little bit on the large side. Okay, so if we look at the loading event, here we can see the crack along the crack ligament. So what we're doing is we're simply, let's go back. Go back. Yeah, there. If we go back, what I'm going to show you are results simply along this line. So we're going to look at the crack opening from here, behind the crack, to the crack position, and then in the ligament that remains. So we're going to look at the strains along this line. I do have results in the whole area, but we're going to look today along that line. So here you can see this is the K. This is at K max. So the red is the maximum strain. The green is halfway to unloading, and then we go down to essentially unloaded. We have a load ratio of 0.1 here. So we can see just prior to overload, and again you can see the scatter. There's grain to grain scatter here, and you can see that the grains reproducibly produce the same kinds of oscillations in all of the load cases. So you can see very clearly the crack tip, but you can also see lots of scatter here, and you can see the unloading event, and you can see some compression here due to reverse plasticity here, maybe up to about 1 millimeter from the crack tip. Then when we overload, you can see a very clear increase in the strain, and you can see here's the crack tip field. And then in unloading, by the time we've unloaded halfway, you can see we're already starting to go into compression. And then as you continue to unload, you can see compressive strains. Okay? So, whoops, let's go back. You can also see that the compression extends some 2 to 3 millimeters in front of the crack. And you can see that, as I said, by the time we've got to halfway down, roughly, you can see we're already starting to go into compression. After overload, this was the event one cycle after overload, and you can see that now we're back to K max, but the K max value here is much lower than we saw before, and in unloading we come back pretty much to where we were before, almost exactly. If you were to take these curves here, they almost exactly superimpose on the ones before. I didn't quite line the two images up, but if you were to line the images up, you'd find they are very similar down here, very similar in the unloaded case. Of course, this is twice the K max, so the load here is much lower. But you can see even at 0.5, the applied load, the full applied load, you can see we still have compression here ahead of the crack tip. And we have a crack tip, as I said, a crack tip compressive field that extends back 2.5 millimeters. Okay, now, this is not intended to be complicated theoretical analyses. It just seemed useful to just apply some very simple bits of analysis. So, if you consider this is stainless steel with a yield stress of around 300 megapascals, a UTS of around 600 megapascals, and Pablo and I fiddled around a bit with the analytical solutions, and we came up with a yield stress value I'm going to use of 450, and you'll see why in a moment. Okay, so if we just put in the simple Westergaard type solution, here you can see the applied load. It cuts off due to this yield stress I've imposed here at about 1500 microstrain, and then as you unload, you get the reverse plastic field. Of course, this reverse plastic field is much sharper than we're measuring, because we're measuring with a gauge volume that is 0.5 millimeter wide. So each point is an average over 0.5 millimeter. So we see a smeared out result. But you can see there are some good similarities, and there are some big differences. So overall the curve is reasonable, but you can see one of the things we do see is we see this tension here at around 3 to 4 millimeters, which is, even in the unloaded case, you can see the significant tension here around 3 to 4 millimeters away, which is clearly not predicted by the model. And if you go on and look at the overload cycle, again, putting in the same kind of yield stress as we had before, you can see it doesn't really quite work, but you can again see how when you go into reverse plastic loading, obviously you get much more reverse plastic loading, and again, in the unloaded case, you see the reverse plastic loading. It's not clear to me. I would suggest that with a 0.5 millimeter gauge volume, you'd expect to see this big dip here, and you can see we don't see the big dip. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that, but that's clearly an observation. Okay, and then after overload of one event, you can see again, this is the prediction if you just follow a simple elastic plastic approach. And whilst the curves sort of are not so far away, they're not perfect fits. if you take the elastic unload, so you subtract all the figures from the K-min and see what happened during the unload events, you can see that many of the unloads are predominantly elastic. So if you just take the difference, so here we're showing the difference from the unloaded case. So we're taking the difference between the maximum load and the unloaded case, the half load and the unloaded case, the 0.3 load and the unloaded case, and so on. And you can see the curves are more or less elastic, but that the peak at the here is not being fully realised in the real case. Whether that's due to smearing or whether that's a real effect is perhaps open to debate. On top of that, you see lots and lots of scatter, and that's due to the crystallite grain size. As you go to the maximum load, again you can see the curves, they don't quite work, the curves don't quite work here near the crack zone. They work in the further away, but they don't really work quite at the crack tip. And then after overload, you see that they work reasonably well, except right at the crack tip. So that was all in plane stress. And of course in plane stress, you'd expect a large plastic zone, and you can see, as I say, a large plastic zone here of 2 to 3 millimeters. So what about plane strain? If we look at plane strain and compare plane stress with plane strain, I've shown the purple ones are the plane strain, and the green ones are the plane stress that I've just shown you. So there's the maximum load, the green one, and the green dashed is the unload, and the purple ones are the plane strain results. And you can see the plane strain, you really generate much smaller compressive reverse plastic zones, as you'd expect, and just as we saw before, lots of tension out here of 4 to 5 millimeters away from the crack tip. And if we look at the unloading to unloading here, you can see this is when the crack has now gone considerably past the overload. So this is 150,000 cycles after the overload. So the crack is some 7 millimeters past where the overload event is. And you can see now there's some considerable bending because the sample is getting smaller, the uncracked ligament is getting small. But what you can see again is you get a fairly linear decrease here. This is fairly linear as you go from Kmax through to Kmin, but you can see the plastic zone here, a small reverse plastic zone of maybe 1 millimeter. So we can see some level of plastic zone, much smaller than in the plane stress case, but we do see some plastic zone in plane strain. Okay, so I've taken you on a very quick journey through a number of results relating to a study on plane strain versus plane stress. DIC clearly measures in both cases what you might call a traditional plasticity-induced closure knee, prior to overload, an absence of a closure just after overload and during the accelerated growth regime, and accentuated closure in the retardation region. Fairly conventional type understanding. Diffraction shows a very large reverse plastic zone in plane stress, but there's no clear evidence of crack face closing. What we don't see in any of our results is any compression or significant compression along the crack faces. So we don't see the stresses that are set up when those crack faces come into contact. So that's an important question. Why do we not see crack faces closing and a large compressive stress? Maybe the closure occurs at the surface of the sample, and that's holding the sample open. It's certainly true that we see tension behind the crack. So after unloading, we see significant tension ahead of the crack, but we don't see crack face closure behind the crack. Or at least we don't see any compression relating to crack face closure behind the crack. If we use a very simple analytical approach, you get some of the results, you capture some of the results, but you need to use a yield stress which is somewhere between the initial yield stress and the UTS. And remember that for stainless steel, you get a lot of work hardening during fatigue, and stainless steels work harden a lot. And I just tried for fun, I tried to use the yield stress I tried to use the UTS, and you really don't get any agreement with the data. It's only when you take some value somewhere in between. Now obviously you can use more sophisticated approaches. You could put in some level of work hardening. You could try and capture that hardening behaviour. I haven't tried to do that here. I just tried to throw the results out and I'll open them up for discussion. And then finally, the reverse plastic strain under plane strain testing is much smaller, a lot smaller than the plastic strain under plane stress, which again is not perhaps surprising. And indeed, after overload, you really don't see a traditional plastic strain area, a reverse plastic strain area. Is too small for me to measure with a 0.5 millimetre gauge body. Okay, I think that describes all the results I wanted to show you. As I say, I hope you take them in the spirit they're intended. These are not perfect results, they're not finished, this is not, you know, an attempt to try and show you a completed piece of work, and I would really appreciate the comments of people who know an awful lot more about fraction mechanics than I. Thank you very much.